You're nothing but an uneducated beggar. Don't you dare speak to me until you learn how to read properly." The words, sharp as shattered glass, cut through the restaurant's hushed symphony of clinking silver and murmured conversations. Every head turned. In the warm, amber light of the exclusive dining room, the insult landed with the force of a physical blow. Hannah, sister of the city's most formidable crime boss, sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask of contempt. Her dark green silk coat was draped over her shoulders, a cape of pure arrogance. Across from her, her brother Ichiro remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes fixed not on his furious sister, but on the target of her venom. The waitress, a young woman named Lena, stood frozen by their table. A single, perfect drop of water trembled on the polished mahogany where it had escaped the pitcher. It was this tiny imperfection that had unleashed the storm. Lena's hands, which had been so steady moments before, were now clenched at her sides, hidden in the folds of her simple black apron. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply absorbed the humiliation, her gaze lowered, her posture a study in forced submission. The restaurant manager began to scurry forward, his face pale with panic, but Ichiro raised a single, commanding finger, and the man froze in his tracks. Ichiro's attention was entirely on Lena. He had seen her before on his weekly visits to this establishment. She was quiet, efficient, moving through the opulent room with a grace that made her almost invisible. He had appreciated that invisibility. But now, under the full weight of his sister's cruelty, she was anything but invisible. He saw the proud set of her shoulders, the tension in her jaw. He saw a strength there that his sister, for all her bluster, had never possessed. Lena could feel the eyes of every patron on her. The heat of their pity and curiosity was worse than the insult itself. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and grilled sea bass. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, suffocating silence. She wanted to run, to disappear into the kitchen and never come out. But then her gaze drifted to the table, to the sheaf of documents spread between brother and sister. They were bilingual contracts, dense with Japanese characters and columns of English text. Ichiro's brow was furrowed in frustration. He had been questioning a particular clause just before the incident, his finger tapping a line of text. Hannah had waved his concern away with a flick of her wrist. "It's just legal language, brother. A standard formality." Now, Lena's eyes scanned the page from her position standing beside the table. Her mind, sharp and trained from years of practice, absorbed the information instantly. She saw the Japanese characters for a 10 million yen asset transfer. And she saw the English translation next to it, which listed a value of $100,000. A simple conversion error, perhaps. But then she saw the same discrepancy in 3 other clauses, each one cleverly disguised, each one favoring the other party, a party Hannah had insisted was trustworthy. The lie was as clear to her as the words on the page. In the pocket of her apron, her fingers found the cool, familiar shape of her father's pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and elegant, a relic from a life that had been stolen from her. Her father, a brilliant corporate lawyer, had been murdered 2 years ago, his case filed away as a robbery gone wrong. The pen was all she had left of him, and with it came the weight of his lessons, the echo of his voice. The truth is always in the details, Lena. Never let them rush you past the details. A profound calm settled over her. The humiliation receded, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. She slowly lifted her head, her gaze meeting Ichiro's for the first time. There was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet resolve that seemed to startle him. Without a word, she reached into her apron pocket. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as she drew out the fountain pen. It was a magnificent instrument, its black resin body gleaming under the soft light, the gold nib catching a sliver of gold. It was an object of power and prestige, utterly at odds with her humble uniform. Hannah scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "What are you going to do? Write me a complaint?" But Ichiro said nothing. His eyes were locked on the pen, then on Lena's face. He recognized quality when he saw it, not just in the pen, but in the woman holding it. He saw the story there, the contradiction. Beggars did not carry such things. Lena uncapped the pen with a soft click that echoed in the silence. She did not touch the official documents. That would be an unforgivable presumption. Instead, she took a clean cocktail napkin from the dispenser on the table. Her movements were precise, economical. "Forgive my impertinence, sir," she said, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "But your sister is mistaken about the contract. And about me." With a hand that was now perfectly steady, she pointed the nib of the pen towards a specific clause. "Here," she said, her voice clear and even. "The yen value is correct. But the dollar conversion is off by a decimal point. It's not 100,000. It's 1,000,000. She quickly scribbled the calculation on the napkin, her penmanship a flawless, elegant script. "It happens again here. And here. The total discrepancy is not a minor rounding error. It is over $27 million in their favor." The silence that followed was heavier, deeper than before. Hannah's face, which had been flushed with anger, was now chalky white with shock and fury. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny it, but no words came out. The evidence was right there, written in elegant ink on a cheap paper napkin. Ichiro slowly picked up the napkin. He stared at Lena's handwriting, then brought the contract closer, his sharp eyes scanning the lines she had indicated. A muscle in his jaw tightened. He did not need a calculator. He could see it now that it was pointed out to him. The deception was subtle, woven into the fabric of a document designed to be confusing. It was a betrayal he would have missed, a costly mistake his sister was either complicit in or unforgivably negligent of. He folded the napkin carefully and tucked it into his breast pocket. He then looked at Lena, his gaze intense, searching. The air crackled with unspoken meaning. He saw not a waitress, but an analyst. He saw not an accident, but an intervention. His voice, when he finally spoke, was dangerously quiet. "What is your name?" he asked, the question a command. "Lena, sir," she replied, her own voice barely a whisper, the adrenaline beginning to drain away, leaving a tremor in its wake. He nodded slowly, then turned his head to his sister. The warmth had completely vanished from his eyes, leaving behind chips of obsidian. "Hannah," he said, the name a shard of ice. "You will apologize to Miss Lena. Then you will go to the car, and you will wait for me. Do not speak to anyone for a moment." It seemed Hannah might defy him. A flash of rebellion crossed her face, but it was extinguished by the sheer force of his will. She stood, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. She muttered a clipped, insincere, "My apologies," without even looking at Lena, before snatching her green coat and storming out of the restaurant, a wake of stunned silence behind her. The manager finally dared to approach, bowing low, stammering apologies for the disturbance. Ichiro dismissed him with an impatient wave. The restaurant slowly began to return to life, but the whispers now were all directed at the table where the city's most dangerous man sat with a waitress. Ichiro gestured to the chair his sister had just vacated. "Please," he said.
"It was not a request."
Lena hesitated for a fraction of a second. Protocol, her training, everything screamed at her to refuse, to melt back into the shadows of the kitchen. But she had already stepped out of those shadows. There was no going back. She sat, her back straight, her hands clasped in her lap. She felt strangely calm, as if she had passed through a fire and come out on the other side. Ichiro watched her, his head tilted slightly. "That pen," he said, his voice softer now, inquisitive. "It is a fine instrument. It has a story." Lena's fingers instinctively went to the pen, which she had placed on the table beside her. "It was my father's," she said, the word simple, but carrying the weight of a life's grief. "He was a lawyer. A good one." He said a man's word was his bond, but a contract was the only thing that kept other men honest. A flicker of pain crossed her face, a shadow so brief he might have missed it if he weren't watching so closely. "He taught me to read documents like these before I could properly ride a bicycle." Ichiro absorbed this information, fitting the pieces together.
The pen.
the knowledge, the composure under fire, the quiet grief. He saw the whole picture. He leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the space between them. "I have a problem, Lena," he said, his voice a low confidence. "I am surrounded by people who smile at me, people who call me brother. And they lie. They lie with numbers and they lie with words." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I need someone who sees the truth. I need a pair of honest eyes." He named a salary that made her breath catch in her throat. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of, a sum that could change everything. "You will no longer serve tables," he stated. "You will work for me. You will read for me." The offer hung in the air, a dangerous, glittering temptation. To work for Ichiro was to step into a world of shadows and violence, a world that had likely been responsible for her father's death. Every instinct for self-preservation told her to say no, to thank him politely and run as far and as fast as she could. But she thought of her reality. The cramped apartment she could barely afford, the mountain of debt her father had left behind, the gnawing emptiness of a life spent serving others while her own mind lay fallow. She thought of the cold case file for her father's murder, gathering dust in some forgotten police archive. This wasn't just a job offer. It was power. It was a weapon. It was, perhaps, a path to justice. She looked at Ichiro again, past the fearsome reputation, past the cold, hard exterior. She saw a profound loneliness in his eyes, the weariness of a man who could trust no one. He wasn't just hiring an analyst. He was searching for an anchor in a sea of deceit. She made her decision. "I read contracts," she said, her voice firm, setting her own terms. "I find the truth in the fine print. That is all I will do." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his lips. "That," he replied, "is all I am asking." And just like that, a new contract was forged between them, unwritten and signed, but sealed in the quiet, opulent dining room, witnessed only by ghosts and whispers. The scene dissolved and reformed, the rich amber of the restaurant replaced by the cool, clean lines of a penthouse office. The city sprawled below, a tapestry of glittering lights. Lena was no longer in a waitress's uniform. She wore a simple, professional gray dress. Before her, on a vast obsidian desk, lay a stack of documents. And next to them, gleaming under the desk lamp, sat her father's Mont-Blanc pen. Ichiro sat opposite her, watching her work, the silence between them no longer awkward, but comfortable, productive. A silent partnership had begun. The passing weeks settled into a quiet rhythm. Lena arrived each morning to find a cup of fragrant green tea waiting on her desk, brewed to perfection. She left each evening leaving behind a single-page summary for Ichiro, highlighting the day's most critical findings in her clear, concise script. It was their silent language, a daily exchange of respect and care. She proved her worth a dozen times over. She unearthed hidden liabilities in a real estate deal, saving him a fortune. She identified a treacherous clause in a shipping agreement that would have given a rival control over his most profitable routes. She became his shield, her father's pen her sword, slicing through the tangled weeds of legal jargon to expose the dangers that lay beneath. They rarely spoke of anything beyond the work. He never asked about her father, and she never asked about his business. Yet, a bond was forming, built on the solid bedrock of mutual trust. He began to see the woman behind the brilliant mind. He saw the way she would sometimes pause, staring out the window at the distant city, a look of profound sadness in her eyes. He noticed she never wore jewelry, save for a simple, thin silver chain around her neck, almost always hidden by her collar. He wondered about the life she had been forced to leave behind, the grief she carried with such quiet dignity. For Lena, Ichiro transformed from a fearsome caricature into a complex man. She saw his fierce loyalty to the few people he truly trusted, his quiet generosity to the families of his men. She saw the immense burden he carried, the constant threat of betrayal that shadowed his every move. She began to understand that his coldness was a necessary armor in a world where warmth was a weakness to be exploited. He was a man living on an island, and she had become its sole, trusted inhabitant. Their strange, Formal relationship was a sanctuary for them both, a quiet space of honesty in a world built on lies. Hannah was never mentioned. Ichiro had sent her away to a distant branch of the family in the countryside, her betrayal dealt with swiftly and silently. But the wound she had inflicted remained, a stark reminder that the greatest threats often come from within. The quiet rhythm was shattered one Tuesday night. A new, aggressive rival had appeared in the city, a syndicate known for its ruthlessness and its cunning. They were making a play for Ichiro's port operations, not with guns, but with paper. They had presented him with a merger proposal, a document so convoluted, so filled with legalese and cross-referenced appendices, that it was designed to induce a headache, not to be understood. For 2 days, Lena had been immersed in its depths, fueled by tea and a growing sense of unease. The city lights twinkled outside the panoramic window, but she saw none of them. Her entire world had shrunk to the pages in front of her. Then, late into the second night, she found it. It was a single sentence, buried on page 342, in a subclause of an addendum. It was a masterpiece of deception, a linguistic trap that, if signed, would cede controlling interest of the entire Port Authority to the rival syndicate in the event of any regulatory fine exceeding a nominal amount, a fine they could easily trigger with a planted informant. It was a corporate checkmate. Her heart pounded as she reached for the phone to call Ichiro, who was in his private quarters 1 floor above. But before her fingers could dial, she heard a sound from the outer office, the soft, metallic click of a lock being picked. She froze. The security guards were stationed downstairs. No one was supposed to be on this floor. She slowly rose from her chair, her father's pen still clutched in her hand. The main office door swung open, and 2 large men in dark suits stepped inside.
They were not Ichiro's men.
Their eyes scanned the room and landed on her. There was no surprise in their expressions, only cold intent. They hadn't come to steal documents. They had come to eliminate the person who could understand them. One of the men smiled, a cruel, thin slash across his face. "The boss said you were smart," he sneered, taking a step forward. "Too smart for your own good," the other man moved to flank her, cutting off her only exit. Lena's mind raced. The panic button was on Ichiro's side of the desk, a world away. Her phone was on the credenza behind them. She was trapped. She backed away slowly, her chair rolling silently on the thick carpet until she felt the cold glass of the window against her back. 40 stories down, the city was a blur of indifferent lights. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Yet, as the first man lunged, a strange calm descended. She held the pen up, not like a weapon, but like a shield, the gold nib pointed towards his face. It was a futile gesture, a writer's defense against a brute, but it was all she had. Just as his hand was about to close around her arm, the door to Ichiro's private study burst open. He moved not like a businessman, but like a predator. Lena had only ever seen his stillness, his quiet authority. Now she saw the violence he held in reserve. It was breathtaking and terrifying. The fight was over in less than a minute. It was a brutal ballet of motion, Ichiro's movements economical and devastatingly effective. When it was done, the 2 intruders lay unconscious on the floor, and Ichiro stood over them, his chest heaving slightly, his suit immaculate save for a small tear in the sleeve. He didn't even glance at the fallen men. His eyes, dark and blazing with a fury she had never seen, were fixed only on her. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. "Are you hurt?" The words were rough, torn from him, laced with a raw fear that stripped away his carefully constructed composure. She could only shake her head, her throat too tight for words. He saw the pen still clutched in her white-knuckled fist. Gently, he reached out and took her hand. His touch was surprisingly warm, his thumb stroking the back of her hand until her fingers finally uncurled, releasing their desperate grip on the pen. "They came for you," he said, his voice low and guttural. "It wasn't a question. Because you are my eyes," he paused, searching for the right words, the corporate language they usually used suddenly feeling hollow and absurd. "You are my most trusted asset." The word felt wrong, cold. He shook his head, his gaze locked with hers. The city lights behind her created a halo around her hair. "You are more than that," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a confession spoken in the aftermath of violence. "In this entire city, in my entire life, you are the only honest thing." The next morning, the office had been scrubbed clean of any sign of the previous night's violence. The air, however, remained thick with unspoken things. Lena sat at her desk, the merger document in front of her, the trap now clearly marked. But she couldn't focus. Ichiro's words echoed in her mind. The only honest thing. He entered the office, his presence as quiet as always, but something fundamental had shifted between them. He didn't sit at his desk. Instead, he walked over to hers and placed a single, thick file folder on the polished surface. He slid it towards her. It wasn't a business contract. She opened it. Inside was the deed to a small, beautiful house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood on the other side of the city. There was also a bank book with a balance that made her eyes water. And underneath that, a second file, thinner than the first. On its tab was a single name, her father's. "I have reopened the investigation into your father's death," he said softly. "My people are looking into it. They will find who is responsible." He tapped the deed with his finger. "This is not payment, Lena. This is a choice. You can take this and walk away from all of this. Be safe. Have the life he would have wanted for you. No one will ever bother you again. I will make sure of it." It was a king's ransom. It was freedom. It was the chance for justice. It was everything she had ever dared to hope for. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the papers, at the promise of a peaceful life, a life where her biggest worry was what to plant in the garden of her very own home. She could escape. He was offering her the one thing he himself could never have, a way out. She slowly raised her head, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. "And what about you?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Who will watch your back? Who will read for you?" He didn't answer. He simply stood there, his silence a confession of the sacrifice he was willing to make for her safety. He was preparing to be an island once more. Lena looked from his face to the deed, then back again. She thought of the quiet respect, the morning tea, the shared silence that was more meaningful than any conversation. She thought of him standing between her and danger, his carefully controlled world erupting into violence for her sake. She slid the file back across the desk towards him. Then, she picked up her father's Montblanc pen, its weight a familiar comfort in her hand. "My father taught me to honor a contract," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And ours is not finished." She took a deep breath, making a new declaration, a new set of terms. "My place is here. With you. But not as your employee." Her gaze was unwavering, holding his. "As your partner." A long moment passed. Then, for the first time since she had met him, Ichiro smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curving of his lips, but it transformed his entire face, chasing away the shadows. He reached across the desk, not to take the pen, but to rest his hand beside hers. Their fingers didn't touch, but the space between them pulsed with a new and powerful current. A new contract had been forged, not of paper and ink, but of loyalty, trust, and the quiet, unshakable promise of a shared future.